Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we are going to be tackling a country that's really a fascinating case study, I think, in the complexities of development in Africa.
Absolutely.
Equatorial Guinea, and you might be surprised to hear that it was considered the richest nation in Africa for over a decade.
Yeah, that's right.
But also ranks incredibly low in human rights and transparency.
Yeah.
It's a puzzle we're going to try and unpack using a YouTube video from the channel Hoser.
All right.
Are you ready to kind of uncover how oil wealth and lavish lifestyles and massive infrastructure projects can exist alongside poverty and corruption?
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating deep dive for sure.
All right.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how a country can be so wealthy on paper but have so many of its people struggling.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. Equatorial Guinea is divided into two main parts, a mainland region and an island called Bioko, which is home to the capital city, Malabo. And that geographic separation actually reflects a deeper economic divide.
Yeah, it does. Bioko Island, with its oil wealth and all of the government infrastructure, really stands in stark contrast to the mainland, where most of the population lives.
Right.
With much more limited access to basic services.
Yeah, it's almost like two different countries within one.
Yeah.
And when we talk about Equatorial Guinea's wealth, we need to be careful about how we measure that.
Absolutely.
It's true, they have a high GDP per capita.
Yeah.
But that figure can be very misleading.
Very misleading. GDP per capita simply divides the total national income by the population.
Okay.
So it gives you just an average, right? It doesn't show how that income is actually distributed.
Right.
In Equatorial Guinea's case, the wealth is very concentrated at the very top.
Okay.
Among the elite, while a significant portion of the population lives in poverty.
So how did this extreme inequality come about?
Well, to understand that, we need to look back at Equatorial Guinea's history.
Starting with its time as a Spanish colony.
Right.
And what's interesting is that even back then, there was a disconnect between the elite on Bioko Island and the majority of the population on the mainland.
Yeah, you can trace that back to the colonial period.
Right.
During that time, resource extraction was really a key focus.
Right.
But the benefits largely went to the colonial powers and a small local elite. And so this created a system where a select few profited from the country's resources, leaving a legacy of inequality that persisted even after independence.
And that inequality was further exacerbated by the country's first president, Francisco Macias Nguema, who ruled with an iron fist.
Really a brutal dictator.
His brutal policies led to mass killings and a devastating drop in life expectancy. It's hard to believe that the average lifespan under his rule plummeted to just 30 years.
Yeah, his regime was a very dark chapter in Equatorial Guinea's history, marked by widespread human rights abuses and just economic mismanagement.
And unfortunately, the situation didn't improve much when his nephew, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, came to power in a coup in 1979.
Yeah, another strong man.
He's been president ever since.
Wow.
Making his one of the longest ruling dictatorships in the world.
Yeah, and while there hasn't been the same level of outright violence as under his predecessor, Obiang's regime has been characterized by repression, corruption, and a real lack of transparency.
Right. And then in the 1990s, oil was discovered off the coast of Equatorial Guinea.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You would think that this would have been a turning point for the country, a chance to really improve the lives of its citizens.
Yeah, but that's not quite what happened.
No, it's a classic example of the resource curse.
Okay.
Where an abundance of natural resources, instead of leading to prosperity, can actually hinder development.
Oh.
And this is often due to, poor governance, corruption, and a lack of economic diversification.
So even with all this oil money flowing in,
the average person in Equatorial Guinea didn't see much of a difference in their lives.
That's right. The oil wealth, instead of being used to develop the country and improve social services, largely ended up in the hands of the ruling elite.
And this lack of transparency makes it really difficult to even track where the money went.
Exactly. The state-owned oil company, GE Petrol, and the government budget are shrouded in secrecy.
Wow.
There's very little accountability, which makes it easy for corruption to flourish.
It's almost as if they wanted to hide how the money was being used.
Well, the government's approach to spending certainly raises questions. They adopted what's called a pro-cyclical fiscal policy, meaning they spent more when oil revenues were high.
That sounds risky.
It is risky. What happens when the oil money dries up?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
This kind of spending is unsustainable. It's like someone spending their entire bonus check without thinking about their regular bills.
Right.
When oil prices inevitably drop, as they did in 2014, the country is left with a huge deficit and very little to show for it.
So where did all that oil money go? Stay with us as we dive into that next.
It's almost like they went on this spending spree.
Yeah.
But instead of, buying clothes or gadgets, they splurged on grandiose infrastructure projects.
Yeah, you're telling me some of these projects seem completely out of touch with the needs of the average Equatorial Guinean?
Yeah.
For example, there's the 6-lane highway
Wow.
that encircles a very sparsely populated island.
Okay.
It's a beautiful road, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But who's using it?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And then there's the $100 million deep water port
Really?
on an island with only a few thousand residents.
Wow.
It just...
Out of scale.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, and let's not forget about the multiple lavish presidential palaces.
Oh, yeah, those?
Some located right in the middle of impoverished neighborhoods.
I mean, come on.
I know, and there's even a brand new capital city being built in the jungle.
Like a whole new city.
Yeah, it's like they're building monuments to themselves while the people struggle with basic necessities.
It's really hard not to see these projects as symbols of misplaced priorities.
Right.
Especially when you consider that, essential services like healthcare and education are severely underfunded.
Yeah.
Many Equatorial Guineans lack access to clean water, proper sanitation, basic medical care.
It's a stark contrast
Yeah.
that really highlights those deep inequalities in the country.
It raises questions about, the motives behind these infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
Are they really about development, or are they a way to funnel money to companies and individuals that are connected to the ruling elite?
That's a good question, especially when you consider the lack of transparency surrounding these projects.
Right.
It's difficult to know how the contracts were awarded, how the costs were determined.
Right. Was there any kind of bidding process?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The lack of transparency is a major red flag. It makes it very difficult to assess whether these projects are truly in the best interest of the country,
Right.
or simply serve to enrich those in power.
Speaking of enriching those in power, let's talk about Teodoro Ngema Obiang,
Oh, yeah.
the vice president,
Right.
and the president's son.
Of course, nepotism at its finest.
His lifestyle is really quite something to behold.
Yeah.
His Instagram account
Oh, I've seen it.
provides a glimpse into this extravagant world of Equatorial Guinea's elite.
Okay.
He posts photos of his luxury cars, private jets, designer clothes, even a massive collection of Michael Jackson memorabilia.
What?
Yeah, I remember seeing a photo of him wearing a diamond-encrusted glove, just like the one Michael Jackson used to wear.
Oh, wow.
I know, that's something.
Yeah. And, that glove was actually seized by French authorities as part of an investigation into his assets.
Wow.
They were looking into allegations of embezzlement and money laundering.
So not only is he flaunting his wealth, he might have obtained it illegally.
Yeah, so while the majority of Equatorial Guineans struggle to make ends meet, the vice president is living a life of luxury that most people can only dream of. It's a stark reminder of the deep divide between the haves and have-nots in Equatorial Guinea.
But the problem goes beyond just the vice president.
Right.
The entire ruling family seems to live in this bubble of wealth and privilege, completely detached from the realities faced by most of their citizens.
And this disconnect is further fueled by the government's control over the media.
Right.
And the suppression of dissent. There's no free press, there's no independent judiciary, and no real political opposition.
Yeah.
This makes it extremely difficult for people to speak out against corruption or demand accountability from their leaders.
It's a system that seems designed to protect the interests of the elite at the expense of everyone else.
At the expense of everyone else.
And the system is becoming increasingly unsustainable.
Right.
As we discussed earlier, Equatorial Guinea's oil reserves are dwindling.
Right.
They're projected to run out within the next decade or so.
Yeah, that's coming up quick.
I know that's a pretty scary thought.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to the country when the oil money dries up?
It's a looming crisis that the government doesn't seem to be taking very seriously.
Yeah.
They haven't diversified the economy.
Right.
They haven't really invested in any kind of sustainable solutions.
Oh, wow.
And their sovereign wealth fund, which is supposed to be a safety net for the future,
Yeah.
lacks clear legal frameworks and spending rules.
So they're basically sitting on a ticking time bomb.
That's a pretty accurate analogy.
And when that bomb goes off, it's the ordinary citizens who will suffer the most.
Absolutely. They're the ones who will bear the brunt of the economic fallout.
It's a bleak outlook, but is there any hope for Equatorial Guinea? Could they turn things around and create a more equitable and sustainable future for themselves?
Well, it's certainly a challenge.
Yeah.
But it's not impossible.
Okay, so what would need to happen for Equatorial Guinea to break free from this cycle of oil dependence, corruption, and inequality? It sounds like they're at a real crossroads.
Yeah, they have a choice to make.
Yeah.
Continue down the same path and just face the consequences. Or try to make some pretty radical changes.
So what would those steps look like?
Well, I think first and foremost, they need to address this issue of transparency.
Okay.
The government's financial dealings, including oil revenues and infrastructure spending.
Yeah.
It all needs to be open and accessible to the public.
So no more secret deals or hidden budgets.
Exactly. Transparency is essential for accountability.
Okay.
When citizens can see where the money's going and how it's being spent, they can hold their leaders responsible.
Right. It also makes it a lot harder for corruption to thrive in the shadows.
Absolutely. And along with transparency, they need to strengthen their institutions.
Oh.
They need an independent judiciary that can fairly enforce the law, a free press that can report on government activities without fear of reprisal, and a vibrant civil society that can advocate for the needs of the people.
So it's about creating a system of checks and balances.
It is.
Where the power isn't just concentrated in the hands of a few.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. They need to shift from a system that benefits the elite to one that empowers the people.
But it's not just about those internal reforms, is it?
Right.
Equatorial Guinea also needs to think about diversifying their economy.
Yeah, absolutely.
They can't rely on oil forever.
No, they need to invest in other sectors like agriculture, tourism, sustainable forestry.
Yeah.
This would create jobs. It would reduce their dependence on oil revenue.
Right.
And make them less vulnerable to fluctuations in global energy prices.
So it's about building a more resilient economy that can weather the storms.
It can weather the storms, exactly. But I'm struck by the fact that even with all the problems we've discussed, there's still a sense of hope.
Yeah.
There are people in Equatorial Guinea who are working for change, pushing for a better future.
And that's the important thing to remember. Change is always possible. Even in the most challenging circumstances. It just requires vision, courage, and a commitment to building a more just and equitable society.
And it requires the voices of the people to be heard.
Absolutely. The future of Equatorial Guinea ultimately lies in the hands of its citizens. They have the power to demand better from their leaders, to hold them accountable, and to shape the destiny of their nation. Well, this deep dive into Equatorial Guinea has been a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah, it's been fascinating.
It's a complex story of wealth and poverty, power and corruption, but also a reminder that change is always possible.
It is. It's a story that highlights the importance of good governance, transparency, and investing in people.
Yeah.
It's a story that we can all learn from as we strive to create a more just and sustainable world.
Well, thank you for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
And we encourage you to, continue exploring, questioning, and engaging with the world around you.
Until next time, keep diving deeper.
See you later.